So there's something kind of cool about the fact that free agency stuff can happen before July 1st now, as long as it's with the team that already had the player. We're getting these little bits of information trickling in. Pascal Siakam was yesterday, day before. Now Malik Monk. I got the allergies this morning. You guys are going to have to bear with me. Woof. The heck just happened? Trying to start a show here, and it's like they got a ball of dog hair blowing into the old throat-a-roo. Whoa. Everybody that's watching just saw my eyes turn red. That was crazy. Okay, so anyway, welcome to the show. It's fantasy basketball, Old Man Squad edition. I get this right someday. It won't be soon, apparently. I'm Dan Vespris, at Dan Vespris on Twitter, at Old Man Squad, if you want to go follow the Umbrella account, where a very cool show dropped this morning from the guys over at King's Weekly podcast. They had the great Fran Fraschilla on the show. Legendary Fran Fraschilla on King's Weekly this week. That's so cool. Well done, guys. Can't wait to tune into that when this show's over. Man, that's so rad. Anyway, as far as we're concerned, we will have the also legendary Noah Rubin coming up here in just a matter of moments to answer the question of, and this is a damn near impossible question, for these rookies, some of whom we talked about yesterday, like Alex Sarr, Zachary Risacher, Donovan Clingan, is there any universe where these players can beat their ADP? Meaning, we don't know where they're going to get drafted in reality. We don't know where they're going to get drafted in fantasy. But we can offer our best guesses at where these players end up and what that then means for where they likely get drafted. As far as the Malik Monk news goes, that's good for the Kings. It's excellent for the Kings. He's back with Sacramento. What was the final numbers on that thing? 4 years, $78 million deal, so about $19.5 million a year. I don't know how the annual breakdown goes, but that's the AAV on that bad boy. And the Kings needed him. They needed some sort of scoring pop off the bench, someone that could create besides De'Aaron Fox. And don't get me started. Look, Domantas Sabonis is such a polarizing figure in Kings media circles. He's an excellent basketball player, but he's not what you'd call a traditional creator. Great screen setter, great passer out of the high post, low post, whatever, dribble handoff kind of stuff. But you don't generally just hand the ball to Domantas Sabonis and say, go here, you've got it at the top of the circle, go get a hoop. He can do it. But that's not going to be the thing that creates for everybody and gets everyone involved. Monk was the best passer in the NBA coming off the bench this year. The best. That includes guys like Chris Paul. Monk was the best. So this is a big one for the Kings. As far as fantasy goes on the Malik Monk front, I think there was a little bit of a disconnect on him. He was not very good in traditional 9-cat this year. Finished at number 148, mostly because his defensive stats were not very good. His rebounding was extraordinarily low for a guy playing close to 30 minutes a ball game. Even as a guard, you kind of hope for more than like high twos sort of deal. And his field goal percent was low. You could sort of ask yourself a question of, is there a planet? Is there a universe where that stuff, any part of that, gets better for Monk? And it's just sort of this natural ebb and flow of things. And you know how the things go over time. That stuff gets better, stuff gets worse, blah, blah, blah. Could it? I mean, there's always a chance stuff like that could improve. But historically, the situation suggests probably not. His biggest I guess it'd be non-scoring counting stat year came in his one season with the Lakers when he played 28 minutes a game, averaged 3.4 rebounds, and 1.2 combined defensive stats. He actually had a weird uptick in blocks this last season that I would argue probably has a higher percentage chance of coming down as opposed to anything else going up. His field goal percent was right around his career mark. I know he was at 47 with the Lakers, but that was the high water. That's really not been him. Sacramento's 44.8 and then 44.3. 3-point percent was kind of low this last year, but really, again, not all that far off from his career mark. And his free throw was back down closer to his career mark after a career free throw shooting season. So when you sort of size him up from the fantasy standpoint, and the 5 assists were very nice, this was almost as good as it gets for Monk. Unless the Kings clear the decks, like get rid of Harrison Barnes, get rid of Kevin Huerter, and then Malik Monk has to play 29 minutes a game instead of 26. I just don't see that happening, though. Besides the fact that, and it's not really the fact that they're not going to clear those guys out of the way. They very well could. But if they do, it's to bring somebody else in. Don't worry. We'll come back and we'll kind of recycle through this stuff. So again, Siakam back to the Pacers and Monk back to the Kings are kind of the two. And I think Gary Payton picked up a player option or something like that, but nah, nobody cares about that. We'll tabulate all this stuff. We'll come cycle back through it during free agency, but these are the ones that are happening in the moment. As far as today goes, I see no reason to hold off any longer. Let's talk about the draft. I promised we'd talk about the draft. We're talking about the draft. This is day 2 of our NBA draft coverage with Noah Rubin, and here we go. It's true, 2 days in a row. And then I'm hoping to do it next week also. We're going to talk about young things. I got to be careful how I phrase that. I feel like YouTube is going to, they're going to pull up the script of the show and they're going to flag it for something. We're talking about rookies coming into the NBA. And actually, it's funny because, you guys can see who I'm about to talk to here, and I'm lost in my own tangential thought. But I talked to Kyle Irving on yesterday's show, and he said something like, "Oh yeah, I'm happy to talk about teenagers playing basketball." And I was like, "Oh my God, just don't ever refer to them as that, even if they are 18 or 19 years old. Find out some other way to describe their age." Noah Rubin at Noah Rubin 22 on Twitter, the pride of Rotoworld Fantasy Basketball, and second timer. You're the first official 2-time guest on Old Man Squad. I can't even remember the name of my own stupid show. Fantasy Basketball. What's happening, dude? Welcome back.
Man, it's great to be back. I guess it pays off to bother you enough about doing shows, just saying, "Hey, I'm available. I like talking about basketball. It's kind of fun." And I will avoid trying to talk about young men or teenagers on the Old Man Squad podcast, because I'm sure those don't flow well.
No, and I just, I don't want the show to get canned by YouTube for too many discussions of 18-year-old basketball players. So I have a general outline. People know that's the way things go, but it's real general when we're talking about something that I don't know jack squat about. So this is basically your stage today. I want you to tell me, and even potentially try to convince me if you want to go like full devil's advocate mode, why I should be interested in what's happening in the draft happening next week. Why should I care? Because the best example I can think of lately for you to be like, "Hey, didn't you see, Wembanyama and Chet and these guys that were awesome this last year?" And the answer to that question is yes, a resounding, obviously yes. But most years I end up saying, I don't need to take the time with this nonsense. And most of the time it probably saves me strife in the long run. So tell me why that thought process is wrong. That's what today's show is really going to be about. So just broad topic, should I care?
I think you should care. I think that part of that is just enjoying the NBA and enjoying fantasy basketball. And maybe a lot of this isn't actually even going to matter for 2 more years. I think last year. Well, yeah, no, I'm saying specifically for this class.
Right.
Last class, it was very easy to say it really doesn't matter what happens. Victor Wembanyama is going to go first, and he's going to be intriguing in fantasy. I don't know exactly how good it'll be, but he'll be fun. He'll block some shots. It'll be really good, be helpful. We didn't know how good he was going to be year one. Then he landed with the Spurs, perfect landing spot. And he was going second round. And I saw him go first, like end of the first round once or twice. So there is no Victor Wembanyama in this draft. There's no guaranteed prospect that's going to be a superstar. And that's what makes this one so much fun. There's no clear cut, hey, this is the number one prospect even. Like there's 4 or 5 guys that, depending on who you ask, he should go first. So it's intriguing in a lot of ways, just because we don't really know what's going to happen. I mean, I have my Hawks shirt on today, and it's pretty close with the betting odds as far as who's going to go first. It's either going to be Zachary Risacher, Alex Sarr, or Donovan Clingan, unless it is some other wild card. But it's probably going to be one of those 3 if the Hawks can ever get Alex Sarr in for a workout, which that probably means that they're not going to take him first because of other things that are happening. No confirmed reason why that isn't happening, but you can kind of speculate he just doesn't want to, or his agency doesn't want to. So we'll see what happens next week. I know that was kind of me just rambling about, hey, we'll see what happens, but landing spot is going to be so crucial to who matters year one.
All right, so let's play out a few hypotheticals then on that discussion and say, okay, Sarr, Clingan, Risacher. I think I did I pronounce that right?
That was perfect as far as I know. We could be both wrong, but I think that's right.
I'm copying what you and Kyle said yesterday. That's as far as
perfect.
I know. I mean, this is like, I have a very specific like model to uphold here. I take pronunciation extraordinarily seriously once you're in the NBA. But if you're not in the NBA, I don't pay attention. I'm not going to get it right. I'm going to purposely get it wrong, and I'll do a bit out of it. So let's say that any one of those 3 guys ends up on the Atlanta Hawks. What does that mean for them from a fantasy standpoint? Because the Hawks, for all of the issues that team has, they do have some centers on the floor already. They have a really interesting young large wing. I don't know what you want to call Jalen Johnson, small forward, power forward type. So how do these players fit into what Atlanta would then want to do going forward?
Yeah, it is pretty interesting because we've been trying to wait on this minute split at center to just go away, whether it's a trade Clint Capella or, let's just move him to the bench, start a Kongwu so he can play 28, 30 minutes again. Like, it's been going on for probably 2 or 3 years where the fantasy community is just like, please, we just want to see Onyeka Kongwu catching lobs for 30 minutes a game. That's all we want. It's going to be great.
Simple.
And now, exactly. And now it's finally going to happen. And then, boom, Hawks jump to the number 1 pick, and it's a bunch of centers at the top. So if they draft Sarr, which I think just doesn't seem likely at this point, they all of a sudden have 3 centers. So I would imagine Clint Capella is the odd man out. There's a number of teams that have expressed or reportedly expressed interest in him. So does he end up somewhere else where he's a starting center? Potentially. That could end up being a good situation for him, in which case it's still a minute split at center, whether it's Sarr or Clingan splitting minutes with a Kongwu. Is either of these prospects good enough to start over a Kongwu from day one? I wouldn't think so, but it kind of depends on what Atlanta wants to do, how much they believe in either prospect. And then with Risacher, they have Jalen Johnson. You mentioned him. DeAndre Hunter's still there. I think the only scenario, right, not super exciting for fantasy, but he'll soak up minutes if they don't trade him. So I think the only scenario in which any of these 3 guys is a guaranteed day 1 starter is if the Hawks trade DeAndre Hunter and draft Risacher and say, hey, we're going to start Trae Young, somebody at shooting guard, whether it's DeJounte Murray or somebody else they trade for, whatever, Risacher, Jalen Johnson, and then a Kongwu. Because Jalen Johnson, he's been playing power forward his whole career. Do they believe that we can run 2 centers and Jalen Johnson at small forward? He's not a bad shooter, but he's not exactly the floor spacer that you want around Trae Young. So it's a lot of interesting lineup questions in Atlanta, regardless of who they draft. It just kind of makes me think like at least 2 guys that have been consistent starters are probably going to be traded.
The draft board, by the way, which I suppose is something I probably should have mentioned at some point on this show, Atlanta, Washington, Houston, San Antonio, Detroit is the top 5. Is there a place among those 5 that you'd want to see these players end up? Like, do you have a fantasy pie in the sky order? Not the one you think will happen, but the one you'd like to happen?
I think so. As a Hawks fan, I want them to draft Sarr because 1, I just think he's the best prospect in this draft, and 2, I think eventually a pick and roll with Trae Young and Alex Sarr is going to be a ton of fun. So I think that's a really good fit for him. Honestly, in Washington, doesn't really matter who they draft. I think that said player is going to play a ton of minutes early on, which makes Washington arguably the best landing spot for a top prospect. Because whether it's Risacher or Clingan or Sarr or somebody else, there's not really anybody there or enough talent there where you're going to say this guy isn't going to start. Like their centers right now, I think, are Marvin Bagley and Tristan Vukcevic. So I'm imagining whether it's Clingan or Sarr, they're probably going to start. Houston isn't a great landing spot for year 1, I don't think. I think the reports are kind of either Clingan, but you have Alperen Şengün there, or Reed Shepherd. Well, you have Jalen Green there, and then also you just drafted Amen Thompson. You have Fred VanVleet. You have all these guys in Houston. Not a great landing spot for year 1. In San Antonio, there's a little bit more wiggle room to say, hey, maybe this guy can start. They have picks 4 and 8. I'd imagine they take at least one point guard with one of those. There's a chance that they take a point guard like a Rob Dillingham that can start day 1 over Trey Jones, potentially. And then Detroit, well, we have to see what happens with them because it's going to be an entirely new team. We just saw Monty Williams get fired. It's new GM, new everything there. So a lot of question marks in Detroit that we probably won't get clarity as far as who would be the best fit until after they're picked.
This is unrelated to NBA draft stuff. Do you think that the Monty Williams situation is the most amazing grift of all time, or do you think he's really that bad?
I don't think he's really that bad. I don't think it's either. I think it was, and maybe this is just me trying to be as much of a humanitarian as I can, but I just think it was just a crappy situation that didn't work out. Work out as far as NBA success. Now he's going to sit at home with a lot of money, and that's probably good.
That's really good.
Right. And I don't think he was that bad of a coach. I think he just did a really bad job, but you can't be that bad of a coach and earn that big of a contract. Like you think
happen. It was really weird that like the decision making, it looked like someone who was trying to get fired for a lot of the season. And we know he's not that bad because he was good elsewhere. Yeah. But man, it felt like he got in there and he was like, oh, damn, this is rough. All right, let's get to work. Jaden Ivey, you will be sitting over there until, I don't know, January, February, something like that. And then we'll let you try something out. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. Everything is completely rebooted in Detroit. For those that didn't hear the news yet, and I suppose you probably all have, Monty Williams is making $65 million over the next 5 years, I believe. And he can do whatever the hell he wants. He'll probably coach again at some point in there, and he can just sort of slap some more money on top of the pile. But man, I get it. Like, upended his family, moved him to Michigan for 1 year. That's a huge pain in the butt. But for $80 million, I think they'll come out of that on the other end okay. The kids will go to school wherever he asks them to now. And if they don't like it, he can buy them each a car. So what about this standpoint? And this is the hard part, I think, with this stuff. We don't know landing spot. We won't until a week, roughly a week, because it's a 2-day draft for some reason this year. Yeah. The thing with rookies isn't so much that none of them has any fantasy value. The issue that I've always had is that they pretty much perennially underperform, at least the ones that get drafted inside the top 75, top 80 range, until we got to Wemby and Chet. These are like some of the only examples of rookies drafted early that outperformed their ADP. That never happens. The example I always go back to is the Luka Trae year, when everybody was like, these guys are going to be absolute Goliaths. And they were like top 100 at the end of the year. Not even remotely close to where they were getting drafted. The guys that tend to succeed The rookies that tend to succeed are often the ones that get drafted outside the top 120 or you get picked up along the way, like a Jalen Williams. Nobody saw that coming. He popped up out of nowhere, and then suddenly he was playing 35 minutes a night, got picked up, became useful. Even looking at the other ones this past year, Brandon Miller wasn't good until the whole Hornets team got shut down or injured. Amen Thompson wasn't good until Alperen Şengün got hurt. His twin brother was good for about 3 weeks and then gone the rest of the year. Whether that was Monty Williams or just his own motor, we don't really know. But oftentimes the guys that are looked at fall on their faces from a fantasy standpoint, underperform. Is there some combination or permutation of these players with these teams that you just talked about where someone might outperform their ADP? That's got to be the toughest question and the one that you're probably like sitting there sweating bullets over for the next 3 months, right?
Yeah, I was actually listening to your show. I don't remember which show you were talking about it, where you were going through why rookies don't matter, but they might matter a little bit now, talking about centers.
Yeah.
Like, and how centers are a great player to look at because they don't have the ball in their hands a ton. And a lot of times, this isn't your reasoning, this is my reasoning, that a lot of times when they're rookies, they're not feeding them the ball. They're getting putbacks, they're getting alley-oops, they're getting easy layups. And then defensively, they're grabbing rebounds and occasionally blocking a shot, shooting a high percentage, typical center stuff. So not as much room for error. Playing point guard as a rookie in the NBA is just so freaking difficult. Hardly anybody comes in and is good at it. Everybody struggles early on. We saw it. Scoot was horrific for most of the year last year. I expect him to be a little bit better towards the end. Didn't get to be quite as good as I expected him to be. But you mentioned that with like Trey and Luka. Trey was unreal the last month or two of the season, but he was horrible to start the year. And that's just what happens. It takes these players months to somewhat figure out how to play point guard in the NBA. And then once they kind of figure it out, they're also going up against teams that have kind of given up on the season. So it helps a little bit. They can figure things out, but it really is. I mean, you go back, I was looking through just stats yesterday. Like Kyrie, I think was like a top 40 player as a rookie. Okay. That was like 12 years ago. Like it just doesn't happen often with guards. It is centers. So Derek Lively wasn't a great fantasy player all season, but he had some strong stretches, especially before Daniel Gafford got there. And I think you're going to want to look in those kind of situations where a team has an established point guard that can facilitate, and you're going to find a center that can block shots, rebound decently, and isn't going to shoot the ball from deep because they're just going to get layups and dunks. And I think that's a pretty safe way to look for center value. I mentioned Donovan Clingan and Alex Sarr. I don't think Alex Sarr really fits that mold super well because I think he is a little bit more perimeter oriented. But if Donovan Clingan lands in a situation where he has an established point guard, I know I was saying Atlanta wouldn't be ideal, but in the scenario, and we'll know this before draft time, who's going to start at center? Is it going to be a Kongwu from day one? Is it going to be Clingan, or is it going to be something else happens and it's Capella? If it's Clingan or Sarr, but I think Clingan fits this example a little bit better, running pick and rolls with Trae Young, that's a good landing spot for a rookie center. I think that there are a couple of other centers like Yves Missy from Baylor, who's going to probably go in the teens, that if he lands in a situation where he has a good ball handler to feed him easy shots, I think, and there's not much competition at center. I think, I don't know exactly what the draft board looks like to where that would be this ideal scenario for him to step in day one, play 25 minutes a game and just catch lobs. But I'm watching him on tape and it's just, oh, this is everything I've seen from Clint Capella the past few years, except he's a couple inches taller and he's significantly younger, so more athletic. So that kind of situation where it's just traditional center stats is a safe way to find value from rookies. There are probably a few other guys that if a couple things go their way could be not necessarily like Jalen Williams, but that kind of pop out of nowhere. Oh, they're actually providing really good value, but a lot of it has to break their way.
Okay. So do you have any, this is fully an impossible question, but I'm going to freaking ask it. So you can tell me to F right off after I say it. Let's say that Sarr or Clingan ends up in your preferred spot, which it sounds like for either of them would be Washington. Am I hearing you right?
Yeah, I don't think that would be a bad spot.
Any idea, any wild guesses where someone like that might get drafted this coming season? I don't have the first flying clue.
I would say this, like, I'm spitballing probably like 80s to 90s, and I don't feel confident about them surpassing that ADP. Like, I don't feel confident. I feel like that's kind of teetering the line, because if you're coming into a situation like Washington, especially for a guy like Sarr, who he's got a mid-range shot that he really likes, like he's not just sitting there taking layups and post shots. And there's not, like, Tyus Jones is good, Jordan Poole is good at times. There's not like a true point guard feeding either center easy lobs. The field goal percentage might not be great for a center, and they might have, a few more turnovers than you want from a center. And, if they start getting blown out because Washington isn't a good team, like, that's not an ideal scenario. So is that a player you want to spend a 7th or 8th round pick on? I'm not confident.
Yeah, that's a tough one. And then Clingan, you've got the poor free throw percent, which is always the one that you're sort of looking at going, can we get enough field goal percent, rebound, block combo to overcome that? And that was sort of what you ended up staring down the barrel of this year with Derek Lively, with Trace Jackson Davis.
Mm-hmm.
Will they do enough? Like, it's basically dunk versus free throw. Can we get enough dunks to counterweight free throw shots? And I very much Hubie Browned that. Free shots. Hubie Brown's always called them free shots. And for those guys, the answer was like soft yes when they were seeing mid-20s in minutes for Lively. He was right around the edge of the top 100. Trace Jackson Davis, he had like a week where he was number 240 because he took 4 free throws a game. And then he had a week where he took like 1 free throw over the whole week. And he was, a top 75 guy. And obviously that would level off in the middle somewhere. But the difference, it feels like, at least, and this is me sort of putting 2 and 2 together from talking to you and talking to Kyle yesterday, is Lively, Trace Jackson Davis, those types this past season, they basically weren't drafted. And if they were, it was at like 140, 150. Sarr, Clingan, those are guys that you think, and I think accurately, by the way, predicting they probably will go inside the top 100 because they'll be names at the top of the draft board, like a Brandon Miller. Not a big man, but probably coming in with similar hype. And I feel like Miller went around 100 this past year. So I don't know. How do you balance that in your mind? Is there a right way?
I think it's just about value. Like, if their ADP ends up being 80 or 90 and they slip in your draft, then you get them at 100, 110, then like, that's fine. But it is a hard thing to balance, just because there's probably other guys going in that range that feel a little safer. And I don't think that the best case scenario for some of these rookies is enough for me to take that chance and say, okay, like, I think that this guy's going to pop. Now, I may do it from time to time and take them just because I'll have multiple leagues and I can try it.
Yeah.
But it is, I mean, it's, especially with this class, it's a tough thing to balance. I'm hoping that 2 years of everybody saying this is the worst draft class they've ever seen will kind of die the hype down enough that maybe there is some value. And maybe that could be a thing, is that typically, I mean, last year was a different example because Wemby was unreal, but I would imagine typically top picks are going between 60 and 80. Maybe that isn't the case this year, but draft hype is such a real thing that everybody's going to overvalue, even despite warnings that, hey, this is not the safest, best draft class you've ever seen.
You got Summer League, then you got training camp. There's all these things that are going to push the ADP in one direction or another. And the really funny part about all this is that right around pick 90 to 95 is where you get into the dregs, where you can just like grab whoever the hell you want. You pick anyone like ranked between 90 and 150 on the ADP board. And so you're so close, but you're right. There probably will be like 10 proven starters minutes kind of guys that are still sitting out there. And you're just like, I can't pass over this dude to take a wild shot on guy who shoots 55% at the foul line and might only play 24, 25 minutes a game if his team is, I don't know, check whatever box, tanking, blown out, terrible, deciding to try to win. Like, either way, you end up screwed. Terrible or better than expected. You need them to be right in that midpoint of like pretty bad and definitely want to develop player X. Anywho, but hey, the draft is happening in a week, whether we like it or not, and we're gonna find out where these guys are. And so, Noah, can we do this again? Maybe like right after free agency, and you can say, "Hey, this guy did land in a pretty good spot."
Yeah, I'm definitely down for that. I'm happy to come on here and just tell you about guys I like and that they're probably going to play 30 minutes per game, then have everything change after free agency.
I was going to say, well, as long as you don't refer to them as teenagers, we're probably fine. Noah, promo time. What do you got going on right now? I know it's a fair amount because you're a Dynasty guy.
Yeah, it should be a fun, very busy week next week. I've got multiple shows lined up with some pretty fun guests, some draft analysts, some fantasy dynasty analysts. So it should be some live shows with good draft content, some Q&A time, and then hopefully some pre-draft stuff. That's all on my Tank Me Later podcast. And then with Rotoworld, we'll have draft grades, different free agency columns, stuff like that. I'll have some updated dynasty rankings, hopefully less than a week after the draft, because there isn't a ton of time to prep all that right now. But it'll be a fun week, probably the most fun week for dynasty managers.
Yeah, this is your moment. And for me, this is like, I'm lost in a fog. At Noah Rubin 22 on Twitter. Go follow him immediately. Noah, thank you for being the first two-timer here on Old Man Squad Fantasy. I got to slow myself down, man. I'm still struggling. I picked this name, and now I'm like, I can't freaking say this. I'm just going to call it OMS. Welcome back to OMS. See, that works okay. Can we make you the first three-timer? How about that?
That's what I was about to say. I hope to be the first three-timer if that works out in free agency, unless you cram some people in.
Yeah, buddy. They won't be teenagers. They'll be grown-ups. He's Noah Rubin. Rotoworld fame. No, I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Dan.
There you go. Now I got to figure out what I was doing to move these. There we go. Okay, I got this sorted out. Thank you to Noah. Thank you to Noah. Noah Rubin, 22, as you guys just heard. Awesome stuff. You know what's fun? This is like, these shows are a crash course for me. Hopefully talking to David Williams on Monday. Hopefully talking to Josh Lloyd on Tuesday. And then the draft is Wednesday. So we're coming down the chute here. And this is, this is sort of a silly way to put it. But for the way that I like to play fantasy basketball, and then the way that I think put that towards you guys, I actually believe that what we're doing here over a 3, 4, 5 day span is probably enough for redraft folks to have the ammo they need going into basically draft board building. However you do that process. For me, you guys know it's all about buckets, looking at ADP, things of that nature. I think this is going to get us mostly adequately prepared for that. Now, if you're a dynasty folks, that like obviously these 3-4 shows is not enough for you. But for redraft, you're going to hear the names that matter. You're going to hear the names that might matter. And then it's just up to you to figure out, do you want to take a chance on any of those guys? The other big news of yesterday, which happened, I think, in the early afternoon, there was a trade in the NBA, and it made me want to spit. The Thunder get Alex Caruso for Josh Giddey. The Chicago Bulls, reports at least had stated that they had deals on the table that would have netted them multiple picks and at least a first rounder for Caruso at the deadline last year. They held on to him now. Chicago gets no picks. I feel like I'm going to do that scene from Billy Madison. I will award you no points, and may God have mercy on your soul. A simple no would have sufficed. Yeah, this is what happened now. The Bulls waited way too long on this one. They got Josh Giddey. Now, look, I'll admit, I think, significantly lower on Giddey than a lot of folks. He has not a horrible, well-rounded game. He had 12.5 points, 6.5 boards, about 5 assists. percentages really weren't bad last year for Josh. They weren't great, but he doesn't hit the 3 ball and he doesn't get many defensive stats. And so now, he's, to me, the tougher question here. What is his role with Chicago? Is he going to be gifted 30 minutes a ball game? Like, is it just going to get handed over to him? I don't know. They still got Kobe White. Zach LaVine, we know, is on the trade block, but as of now, he's still there. And Giddey got played right off the court in the postseason. So he didn't want to be in Oklahoma City anymore. And frankly, it didn't seem like they really wanted him to be there. The previous season, last year, not this most just completed one, Giddey played 31 minutes a game, averaged 16.6 points, 8 boards, 6 assists, 1.2, still very low on the steals and blocks board. Free throw percent was down at 73, still only 1 3-pointer a game. More 3-pointers sort of like per attempt this year, and his percentage was a little bit better. So if you want to try to figure out what's going to happen with Giddey next year, it's probably better to look at the previous season. Could he get 14.7 shots with the Bulls? I think only if they do officially move Zach LaVine. Then you're like, all right, I guess he could maybe slide his way into something because DeMar sounds like he might be back. White, Vooch, these guys are still there, but that does leave some shots available and probably more than he took this most recent season with Oklahoma City. The big question mark in my mind, on top of the usage, there's two big question marks. Question mark number one is, can he get up to 14 shots a game and do the same kind of stuff in Chicago as Oklahoma City? I would give that one slightly less than a coin flip shot. And then the other is he an 80% free throw shooter now, or is he what he was the previous couple of years, which is more like 72? Still a young guy, so the free throw percent can continue to trend up. It's not that insane to think that he could just be an 80%er now, because it's not like he has 10 years as a 72%er. He had 2. I don't know, man. I don't know. Giddey's always overdrafted because people are like, oh, this guy does points, boards, and assists. I got to scoop him up. But then there's these big holes in his game, which is not much in the way of defensive stats, no 3-pointers. Free throw was an issue before, and now he's kind of turned into a neutral, which, again, that's a big jump in the right direction. But does it stick? We really don't know. I'm interested in where he goes. He continually gets wildly overdrafted. He got drafted at like 65 this year. The hell was that all about? 8-cat? Maybe. Points leagues? Maybe. You wipe out free throws and turnovers last year. He was sort of not that far away from that. I mean, even still, I don't know what everybody was thinking. So does that happen again this coming season where he gets drafted earlier than he's ever been for more than 2-3 weeks at a time? Or is this now finally the season where people are like, you know what, I don't think this guy's really going to do very much, and he slides? In that case, I would take at least a glance at Giddey. But if he continues to go in that 5th, 6th round range, I don't want anything to do with it. Meanwhile, Alex Caruso, who barely had to be a part of the offense at all in Chicago, he took 7.5 shots a game this last year, and he was number 52 in 9-cat. 10 points, 2 threes, 4 boards, 3.5 assists, 2.7 combined defensive stats from one of the best defenders in the NBA. Percentages were meh, but he doesn't take any free throws and he doesn't take any shots. So cool. At 28 and change minutes per ball game, which again, like, that feels very repeatable in Oklahoma City. They need a guy like that. I would love to draft Alex Caruso this coming season. I think people are going to be like, there are not going to be any shots for him in OKC. Guess what? I don't care. This is a trade where more shots were going out than coming in. That's great. Caruso played alongside Kobe White for stretches, Zach LaVine, DeMar DeRozan, Vooch, and he still found his way to 5th round fantasy value, putting him behind Shea and Chet and Jalen Williams. That's less. DeMar DeRozan took 17 shots a game and 7.7 free throws. Shea took 20 shots and 8.5 free throws. Slight edge to Shea there. Yeah. What was Kobe White's final total on shot attempts this year? 15.3. And it was higher than that when, because you still had like the first month of the year where Zach LaVine was trying to play through stuff. Vooch took 16. Even if you take this sort of conservative estimate on those dudes and just say it was about 31 shots a game for those two guys, plus DeMar at 17 is 48 shots a game. That was what Caruso was behind. Chet was 11 and a half. What the hell was Jalen Williams? 14. 15 and a half on those guys on top of Shea's 20. Or sorry, 20. What did I say? 15 and a half, 25 and a half. That's 45 and a half instead of 48. There are technically more shots available, I would argue, in Oklahoma City than there were in Chicago. But that doesn't even matter. Caruso doesn't need to take a shot, basically. The shots are important because he needed to get to the 10 points and the 2 3-pointers. You guys don't think that's repeatable? I do. It's going to be about staying upright for him this year. I can't wait to talk about Alex Caruso ad nauseum during NBA draft season because nobody's going to want him on fantasy teams because he only scores 10 points a game. And we're going to be like, oh, this is a guy you can probably get in like the 8th round, and he's going to shore up all of your defensive stuff. And that means you don't have to worry about that as much earlier. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe people are like, yeah, I'll take Caruso at 80, and then I'll have a decision to make, and so on and so forth. Anyway, that brings us to the end of today's proceedings and to the end of another week here on Old Man Squad Fantasy Basketball. Please, as I ask you guys every show, please, if you have a moment and you're watching, hit that thumbs up button on YouTube, subscribe on YouTube, follow at Dan Vespers and at Old Man Squad on Twitter. And if you're listening after the fact on any of the traditional pod channels, please subscribe or follow or whatever the hell the site calls that particular button so that you get alerts when shows drop. And if you have a moment, a 5-star review would really go a long way. There's a bunch of you that are listening that have not done that yet. I need your help. Seriously, need your help right now. I know you're like, didn't I do this already? Yes, you probably did, but it's probably for Fantasy NBA Today. Old Man Squad Fantasy Basketball needs your help. And if you guys want to be a part of it, let me know. Holler. We're looking for podcasters. We're looking for good people. Anybody that really wants to just kind of hang out and do basketball or baseball or football stuff and grow as part of a really comfortable and happy community. It's been a really cool first month and change. Oh, man, I can't wait till the NBA draft ramp up. The fantasy NBA draft ramp up. We're going to get nuts. It's going to be so much content. It's out of control. I'm Dan Vespers. Thanks again to Noah Rubin at Noah Rubin 22. Go check him out. We'll see you guys on Monday with likely David Williams. We'll talk a little bit more draft stuff just for a few more days. And then we start looking towards free agency. This is still an okay part of the NBA offseason calendar. It's mid to late July where we're just twiddling our thumbs and waiting for Yahoo leagues to open. But you know what we haven't done this offseason that we can do then? Team analysis. I hate doing team analysis earlier because then free agency and trades happen and the whole thing just gets obliterated. Because what good is it to you if I'm just like, here's what happened to the Detroit Pistons this last year, and then they signed 3 free agents in a week? All that work I just did went down the toilet. So I'm waiting. I'm biding my time. We'll get into all that stuff. After free agency. Okay, we're done for real now. I don't know, come up with all these things to mutter about at the end of the show. Hey, I'll be doing a minor league baseball game tonight. If anybody feels like they want to hear more Dan, I'll be out in Rancho Cucamonga calling the Dodgers A-ball game. And I don't know where the hell you can hear it, but I'll try to tweet about that over at Dan Vespers. See you guys on the socials, everybody, and back here on Moon Day. Later.